Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post. Columbia University is the first elite university to have to do massive layoffs because their researchers don't have paid work to do. And why don't they have paid work to do? Because Trump cut off their funding. First, it was $400 million. Then it was an additional $250 million. The universities can't operate on their own if they're not being given handouts by the federal government. From inside higher ed, Columbia lays off 180 researchers amid intense financial strain. And from highereddive.com, Columbia University vows to remove any future encampments. Well, it's not just about future encampments. The Trump administration is not impressed. Here's what they have to say. From the Wall Street Journal, Trump administration proposes terms for federal oversight of Columbia University. The government presented the Ivy League school with a proposal for a consent decree. The consent decree would be an agreement between the university and between the federal government, which would be overseen by a judge to make sure that the university was in compliance with the agreement. In other words, a federal takeover essentially of the university because they can't be trusted to run it on their own. Columbia University is laying off 180 researchers after the Trump administration cut the university's research funding by more than $650 million so far. Quote, Columbia's leadership continues discussions with the federal government in support of resuming activity on these research awards and additional other awards that have remained active but unpaid. According to university leadership, who wrote this in a memo. Quote, we are working on and planning for every eventuality, but the strain in the meantime financially and on our research mission is intense. While federal agencies such as the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Energy have cut research funding at universities across the country, the Trump administration has specifically targeted a handful of high-profile universities, including Columbia, for allegedly failing to curb anti-Semitism on campus. They know they did it. It's okay to say allegedly, but yeah, they did it. As we're talking about our great American universities, we also can't let it not be said that at Columbia, they have over a 50% population of students that are not from the United States. So they're really like a global organization. A global organization getting billions of dollars in funding from the federal government. And of course, it's not the government's money. It's the people's money that they're spending. Columbia is taking a two-pronged approach to navigating the sudden deep cuts to federal research funding. The first focuses on, quote, continued efforts to restore our partnerships with government agencies that support critical research, and the university said the second prong is about taking action to adjust and in some cases reduce expenditures based on current financial realities. Despite Columbia's previous president acquiescing to Trump's demands to enact numerous policy changes to address alleged unchecked anti-Semitism if it wanted its funding back, the university is still negotiating to recover it. The university is going to be forced to sign this consent decree, and this is going to be a template format for this university, for Harvard, for all the other universities that have had their funding cut. They're going to have to comply with the terms of this agreement. And the agreement is going to be pretty one-sided because when you have what someone else wants, you get to create those kinds of agreements. In the meantime, the layoffs announced on Tuesday represent about 20% of researchers who are funded, quote, in some manner by the terminated grants, according to the statement signed by Claire Shippen, Columbia's acting president. And the layoffs this week aren't likely the end of the financial repercussions of the cuts to Columbia's federal research funding. No, because $650 million when you get down to it is actually kind of a lot of money. Quote, in the coming weeks and months, we will still need to take actions that preserve our financial flexibility and allow us to invest in areas that drive us forward, the statement said. Quote, this is a deeply challenging time across all higher education, and we're attempting to navigate through tremendous ambiguity with precision, which will be imperfect at times. Don't blame us. We got a lot more people we gotta let go. I will say those statements were crafted pretty well. I couldn't have done better myself. But here's the problem. This is what it really gets down to. They're not going to be able to do whatever it is they want to do at the university. And what the federal government wants out of the university is a lot. They want a complete culture change, which is necessary because the culture is completely ridiculous at this and other universities. The Trump administration has presented Columbia University with a proposal for a consent decree, a form of federal oversight that would give a judge responsibility for ensuring Columbia complies with the agreement, according to people familiar with the situation. Columbia leaders are negotiating with the government and weighing what to do, the people said. The university's board is undecided whether to accept a consent decree. For a consent decree to take effect, Columbia would have to agree to enter it. That's the consent part. The consent decree is different than, say, writing a letter and saying, okay, yeah, sure, we'll do all this stuff, and then turning around and not doing it anyway. Harvard has been trying that. It's not working so well for Harvard. From Black Enterprise, Harvard folds renames diversity office amid pressure from Trump. Renaming your diversity office to something else is what a lot of people were concerned about with these changes that, they're just going to change a few things around and change some people's titles, and there really won't be any legitimate changes. You can't change the culture on campus. And Trump and his people said, well, hold my beer. And then he went to work. They are making changes. Here's Linda McMahon's suggestion in response to Harvard's courageous renaming of their diversity center. Linda McMahon blasts Harvard in a scathing letter telling Elite University it will no longer get federal grants. McMahon says Harvard has made a mockery of higher education in America. And that's significant because Harvard was counting on $9 billion from the United States government and then counting on more money and more support financially from the United States government for it to operate and do what Harvard does. The government has told Columbia University that it can either negotiate and accept a consent decree or face a court battle that could end up with the school facing more public scrutiny and, in the end, the same kind of legal agreement to make changes, perhaps with even worse terms. With a consent decree, the government is seeking viewpoint diversity among Columbia's faculty and that the school not consider race in admissions. Columbia was thrust into a battle with the Trump administration in March, when the government canceled $400 million in federal grants and contracts over concerns about campus anti-Semitism. The school agreed to an initial list of demands and is now in further talks about the future of its federal funding. There's so much going on with these universities and the stories around them that a lot of these articles, unless you're on like InsideHigherEd.com, the real industry insiders for colleges and universities, they don't even have the correct updated numbers. It really is over $650 million now. The negotiations at Columbia are part of a broader fight between the Trump administration and elite universities. The White House is also fighting Harvard University over federal funding, among other things. A Columbia spokesperson said, quote, "This story is based entirely on hearsay and does not hold merit." She pointed to a statement issued last month from acting university president Claire Shipman, who said that Columbia would reject any agreement that would require relinquishing its independence. Well, then you're not going to get any money, so you'll be a private university, truly private and independent. It'll be great for your character. You can teach so many lessons about being on your own. A consent decree would be a major escalation of how the federal government normally resolves education-related civil rights issues. Typically, after federal lawyers investigate and find evidence that civil rights were violated, schools enter voluntary agreements to change their practices. The federal government has little ability to enforce such agreements. The Biden administration entered into such voluntary agreements over anti-Semitism concerns with Brown University and Rutgers. Columbia could fight the move in court. The Justice Department would need to prove that the arrangement is warranted. But a court case could take years, and Columbia would likely lose federal funding in the interim and might ultimately lose. And that's why sometimes people do settle cases, because it gives you certainty among uncertainty. And if this was like 10% of their funding, you could fight something like this in court and kind of see what happens. If this is like 50% of if this is a majority of their funding, even if it's a significant amount, like 30%, they can't afford to fool around with this. Whatever the Trump administration says is what these guys are ultimately going to have to do. Opposing signing the consent decree would also open the school up to require depositions and legal fact-finding, which could keep the school's campus politics in the spotlight. Because everyone knows that this university and other universities were likely up to no good. In the depositions, in getting a hold of documentation, you can demonstrate what these guys were really up to. There would be news story after news story after news story. When you pull them out in the public and they're not in control of their environment, we already saw how they did in front of Congress. They all did terrible. They lose every time and things just get worse for them. Typically, a consent decree involves a legally binding agreement with compliance overseen by a judge. In the past, the government has implemented consent decrees in instances such as the Live Nation merger, where the newly formed company agreed to certain restrictions. Such decrees were used heavily during the Obama administration to negotiate with cities for changes to their police departments. Because even though the federal government is not supposed to control local police departments, that wasn't fun enough for the Obama administration, which had political ideas about how to manipulate local police departments. Linda McMahon appears to be on fire and seems to want to burn Harvard down, because if you take away all of Harvard's government funding, then it's not Harvard anymore. It becomes something else completely, something a lot smaller, a lot less influential, probably not nearly as legitimate in terms of their overall credentials and the reputation of the school. And that's before they lose their nonprofit status, which is a whole separate issue with Harvard. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon sent a scathing letter to Harvard University President Alan Garber on Monday, not only blasting the Massachusetts Ivy League school's handling of anti-Semitism on campus, but also advising school officials to refrain from applying for future federal grants because they will not be provided. And this is a point I've made on several of these stories. It's not just the current grants and contracts that are at issue. It's the entire 4 years of the Trump administration. That entire time period, it's multiple years of contracts. Some of these grants and contracts extend past more than 1 year. But even so, they're expecting to get billions upon billions of dollars from the federal government every year. So in the case of Harvard, they could take their 69% from their grants, regardless of what they're researching, whether it's cancer, whether it's diversity, 69% to pay Harvard, and the rest actually goes towards the research. All that aside, they lose billions every year for 4 years if they can't get this figured out. In her letter, McMahon told Garber that the federal government has a sacred responsibility to be an important steward of American taxpayer funds, adding that the school has amassed a largely tax-free $53.2 billion endowment and receives billions of dollars in taxpayer funds each year. That much the school already knew. Quote, receiving such taxpayer funds is a privilege, not a right, she wrote. Yet instead of using these funds to advance the education of its students, Harvard is engaging in a systemic pattern of violating federal law. Where do many of these so-called students come from? Who are they? And how do they get into Harvard or even into our country? And why is there so much hate? These are questions that must be answered, among many more. But the biggest question of all is, why will Harvard not give straightforward answers to the American public? Harvard is a private university. They don't owe me any answers, but they kind of do owe the American public answers when they're taking the American public's money. And in addition to that, they need waivers and permission from the Department of Homeland Security to bring in their foreign students. And the Education Department now has some questions about who some of these foreign students are. What are their backgrounds? Because of the hysteria and the protests, especially the ones that Harvard just let run loose. Something does not seem right, and they need to answer questions. She also said the university has made a mockery of the higher education system in the U.S., inviting foreign students to its campuses who engage in violent behavior and show contempt for the U.S. McMahon went further and slammed the school for adopting an embarrassing remedial math program for undergraduates, questioning why a school that's so difficult to get into has to teach low-level mathematics. She called Harvard out for being embroiled in plagiarism scandals and lambasted the school for allowing Harvard University and the Harvard Law Review to engage in ugly racism. McMahon blasted Harvard for hiring former mayors Bill de Blasio of New York City and Lori Lightfoot of Chicago to teach leadership at its School of Public Health. Well, this is like hiring the captain of the Titanic to teach navigation to future captains of the sea, she said. Quote, the above concerns are only a fraction of the long list of Harvard's consistent violations of its own legal duties. Given these and other concerning allegations, this letter is to inform you that Harvard should no longer seek grants from the federal government since none will be provided, she said. Quote, Harvard will cease to be a publicly funded institution and can instead operate as a privately funded institution, which some institutions do actually do, drawing on its colossal endowment and raising money from its large base of wealthy alumni. Quote, you have an approximately $53 billion head start, that's their endowment, much of which was made possible by the fact that you're living within the walls of and benefiting from the prosperity secured by the United States of America and its free market system you teach your students to despise. This is about as hardcore as you can get in a professional letter discussing billions of dollars. Way to go, Linda McMahon. In closing, McMahon reminded Garber, the head of Harvard, that the Trump administration had been willing to maintain federal funding to Harvard as long as the school complied with federal law to protect and promote student welfare and stop racial preferencing. Quote, the proposed common sense reforms, which the administration remains committed to, include a return to merit-based admissions in hiring, an end to unlawful programs that promote crude identity stereotypes, disciplinary reform, and consistent accountability, including for student groups, cooperation with law enforcement, and reporting compliance with the Department of Education, Department of Homeland Security, and other federal agencies, she said. The administration's priorities have not changed, and today's letter marks the end of new grants for the university. Harvard got the letter, and here's what they had to say. Quote, today we received another letter from the administration doubling down on demands that would impose unprecedented and improper control over Harvard University and would have chilling implications for higher education. Today's letter makes new threats to illegally withhold funding for life-saving research and innovation in retaliation against Harvard for filing its lawsuit on April 21st. They went on to say, Harvard will continue to comply with the law, promote and encourage respect for viewpoint diversity, and combat anti-Semitism in our community. Harvard will also continue to defend against illegal government overreach aimed at stifling research and innovation that make Americans safer and more secure. I don't think anyone can seriously say that the federal government is trying to stifle innovation or cures the way that Harvard's portraying it. And I would understand from Harvard's point of view, like, hey, you're a 4-year administration in the federal government. We've been around for a while, so we can kind of take care of our own business. We know what we're doing. Thank you very much. And they have a point. I would want respect no matter how silly I acted or how much trouble I got myself into. We all want respect. And you can want respect and you can get respect. But first you have to give respect and then also stop asking for billions of dollars for American taxpayers without any legal responsibilities. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.